These are the three things I most want to see from Oregon in the game against Oklahoma State. And don't worry, it's just me today.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you all so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Tons coming on today's show. Talk about Will Stein, who's wide receiver 1 this year. The impact of that 2024 class is being felt right here, right now. And on today's show, it's brought to you by our friends over at Mazda. Just like there's more to every player, more dedication, more attention to detail, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Stay tuned later in the episode for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward Mazda Move and Be Moved. Let's start with Dante Moore. I liked what I saw from Dante Moore in week 1 against Montana State. He was efficient. He wasn't perfect. He made the right reads. He didn't force the ball. He made some good throws, but he wasn't asked to do a whole heck of a lot. And, the point spread in this game would indicate Oklahoma State isn't much more of a challenge to Oregon than Montana State was last week. And I think that's selling Oklahoma State a little bit short. When you look at the transfer portal class that they brought in, a lot of new players all over the place. Guys that are good enough to be at various, high-level Group of 5 or Power 4 schools are not at Montana State for a reason. Why? Because they're good enough to be at that level. So at the very least, is this a top 3 roster that Oregon's facing this year? No, far from it. I think that Oregon is in the camp again this week where talent on the field favors the Ducks in just about every single position. I just don't think the gap is quite as big as it was a week ago. So I think whatever Dante Moore does put on the field gives us more of a data point to stash away for how we set our expectations and goals for him throughout the course of the season. Last week I said on a scale of 1 to 10, with Penn State being a 10 on how big of a test or how big of a conclusion you can draw from what we saw in game 1. Montana State was a 4. I think Oklahoma State is probably around a 5.5. I think they're in that, but maybe a 6. I think they can work their way up to the 6. Probably nothing over that. But first thing is with Dante Moore. I'm curious to see if he is going to have more downfield shots that he takes in this game. Now, I very much appreciate that he didn't feel the need to take them last week because guess what? He didn't need to. But in this game, take the touchdown to Kenyon Sadiq, for instance. I don't think a 5-yard hitch is going to result in an 18 to 20-yard touchdown or whatever it was. It might result in a 5-yard gain. Nothing wrong with that. You take yards, especially on first down. It's not going to be quite as easy for guys to just get away, get out of tackles. Like, you're dealing with a better roster in this situation. So, if required, if Oklahoma State starts to bring a safety down in the box and says, hey, we're going to force you to take those shots, can he hook up with Decorian Moore for a deep ball? Can he find Malik Benson or Kyler Casper down the field? Or does Justice Lowe or Gary Bryant get involved pushing it over the top? Because as of now, I know what Oregon's receiving corps can do in those short yardage situations, short to medium range, but we haven't yet seen, who's the primary deep ball guy if, it's third down and 8 and the best chance you have to convert is a one-on-one fade down the sideline, maybe on a slot fade situation against cover 1 or zero pressure. Like, is it Decorian? Is it Malik Benson? He was Oregon's leading receiver last week. More on that later on today's show. So that's the first thing, always, is look at the quarterback and say, all right, what are we going to get from Dante Moore? Maybe it doesn't need to look different. And if it doesn't, I don't think that's the end of the world. But I do think there will be a couple more moments perhaps where Oklahoma State wants to force Oregon to take those shots because, Montana State tried to keep everything in front last week. That didn't go very well. So that's first thing. Does he take a few more of those shots? Can he convert on? Second thing is the offensive line, who were brilliant last week. I gave them their flowers on my reaction show. I had a couple of guys on my underrated individual standouts coming out of that game as well. Dave Iuli and Alex Harkey on the right side. This is a group, and, Emmanuel Prenon, I think, might play this week. Hopefully Oregon doesn't necessarily need him. Didn't look like when he went out with an injury last week, there was a big drop-off, if any at all. Like I felt like he went out of the game and they didn't miss a beat because they have some veterans who they've had in the system for the last couple of years whose bodies are ready to go and who have been solid, productive players as, rotation or, spot starting offensive linemen. Guys like Dave Ewley, who did start last week. We'll see if that happens again. Or is Matthew Bedford the starting guard? Is it Kavika Rogers? We'll see what happens. But again, you're not going against the best defensive line you're going to face this year. That's going to be Penn State, I think, pretty clearly. You are going against a defensive line that I think is going to be more talented than what you saw against Montana State. So does it look the same? Do they take a step back? Do they somehow take a step forward? But if Dante Moore has time to throw, boy, guy looks like he can be incredibly dangerous. We saw how well the ball comes out of his hand last week. It is a beautiful thing to watch. But as we know from his time at UCLA, and as is the case for most quarterbacks, he's going to be a lot better when he has a clean pocket. So can you run the ball the way Oregon did against Montana State, which was at will whenever they needed to with a variety of different schemes? And can you keep Dante Moore clean once again? Because the gap, I think the biggest gap from last year's first game to this year's first game was the offensive line. I don't know that there was any other singular player or position group that underwent a more significant game one improvement against an FCS team than the O-line. I don't even know what you would argue if you were trying to take the other side of that particular argument. So those are two things right off the bat that come to mind when I think about, okay, what do we want to see against Oklahoma State? The third thing is situationally. So you're going up against a coaching staff and Mike Gundy, and we talked about the, kind of shots going back and forth. I thought it was a little overblown, but certainly so too was a $40 million number. Like, where's it coming from, right? Like, I think that was Mike Gundy playing more to what, he's dealing with in his situation over at Oklahoma State. But Oregon last week, I should have checked before I started recording, but I think they were really good in situations, particularly on defense. Montana State was 3 of 12 on third down. Oregon was 7 of 10 on third down, 2 of 2 on fourth. Montana State was 1 of 2 on fourth down. So on the critical plays, Montana State was 4 of 14. You've got a backup quarterback coming into Autzen Stadium. You should be able to have, I'm not going to place a 3 of 12 expectation, but this is one area where at times over the years, for those of you that are more critical of Oregon defensive coordinator Tosh Lupoy, third down defense, which as Dan Lanning often talks about, is a reflection of what happens on first and second down as much as anything. Third down defense has not always been a strength for this team. They've improved over the last couple of years, but it needs to become a strength. You look at the best defenses in college football, like Ohio State and Texas, who played a great defensive game, or Clemson and LSU played a great one last week as well. Those teams are able to get off the field on third down when the situations arise. So if you keep Oklahoma State under 50% on third down, I think that would be a really, really good sign that there's cohesion on that side of the ball, that the execution is starting to get to where, or just is where it needs to be. Because last week, frankly, it was. Like 3 of 12, 1 of 2, I'll take that all day. I don't care who the opponent is. Now, it'll get tougher and tougher as you go against better players and better teams, better coaching staffs as well. You have a really good, historically, a really good staff. We'll see what Oklahoma State winds up being this year. But I have pretty lofty expectations for the defense in this game because Haas Haney got injured, and so you're dealing with a backup quarterback. There's no reason defensively this game shouldn't look like the Wisconsin game last year, which was on the road. It was later in the season, but you had Braden Locke back there slinging it, and Oregon's defense was dominant, and it really won the game because the offense was just so out of sorts. At home, I think the offense will be all right as long as the offensive line is good, but those are the three things that I most want to see from this Oregon team. Different than keys to the game. I'll have those tomorrow, but those are the three things I most want to see. Can Dante Moore hit some downfield shots? Is the offensive line going to be just as good? And can the defense continue being great situationally? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hit me up on Twitter. All of that good stuff. Let's talk about Oregon's offensive coordinator. How are we feeling? How are we feeling about Will Stein? First, this episode is brought to you by Upside. Locked On Ducks fans, are you still paying full price for gas? Stop leaving money behind. Get real cash back every time you fill up with the free Upside app. Simply download the free Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and start earning cash at the pump today. Use my limited time promo code FOOTBALL. Get an extra 25 cents back per gallon on your first fill up. You could make up to $300 a year just from buying the gas that you already needed. At first, you might think it's too good to be true, but it's totally legit. Real people are getting paid just to make their daily commutes. I put my code in the other day, and guess what? I'm now earning cash back for the gas that I already need. So you can as well when you download the free Upside app, and you can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Don't let this offer drive on by. Use my limited time promo code FOOTBALL in the Upside app for a limited time 25 cent per gallon bonus. That's promo code FOOTBALL. Offers vary by user and location. Go to upside.com for terms and conditions. Check out Upside and start saving today. This episode is also brought to you by our friends over at Mazda. Mazda's moving the game forward. Brought to you by those who believe it's not just about playing the game, it's about redefining it. Because these are moments that do more than win. They push what's possible. They remind us to go that extra yard, shift into that extra gear, and keep moving the game forward. I'm going with Amari Washington here. Drove the defense forward and drove Montana State backwards in a couple of instances. He was unblockable last week. His first time starting, his debut with the Ducks really as a starting defensive lineman, I don't know how much better it could have gone. I really don't. I hyped him up all offseason. He delivered on Saturday. If he does again, then boy, Oklahoma State could be in for a long afternoon at Autzen Stadium. When you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. All right, I touched on the play calling a bit earlier in today's show. I thought the game plan against Montana State was pretty plain, pretty vanilla, pretty simple. And guess what? When you have way more talent on the other side, what else should you do? Nothing but that. Why show stuff? You keep stuff in your back pocket. Save it for the Penn State game or any other game that gets tight. You don't need to put everything. You don't need to put all your cards on the table right now. So, Who Dat Duck sends in this take on Oregon's offensive coordinator Will Stein, now in year 3. Oregon Ducks opinion. I'm going to attach a Spencer scale of agreement to this. Will Stein is overrated and the benefactor of amazing talent. I find that his scheme and play calling overvalues stretching the ball sideline to sideline and has thus made the quick hitch and wide receiver screen my least favorite play calls in all of football. The passing game feels like they're still unable to consistently push the ball downfield, hit timing passes, or scheme open receivers. Inversely, when thinking about the run, it's hit or miss, as I remember many of the longest runs against Montana State were initially stuffed but poorly defended on the edge, allowing for chunk yards on bounce outs. Ultimately, I do not have specific stats to back my claim up, and this is just based on eye test. Talent is extraordinary, but the scheme leaves something to be desired. Okay, a lot to unpack here. I get where your head's at. My head is not there, but I do get where you're at. As I mentioned earlier in today's show, yeah, I'm interested to see and would love to see them be able to connect on some downfield shots. Dante Moore didn't hit one of those. I think his longest completion was, I don't think it was very long. It was the 50-yarder to Jay Harris, which was a Texas route. Kyler Casper had a 40-yarder. The next longest reception was Kenyon Sadiq had a 20-yard touchdown, and that was completed 5 yards down the field. Really, the biggest pass that Dante Moore completed was an 18-yarder to Malik Benson. I think that was the touchdown. Might have been on the deep in cut as well. But, yeah, there wasn't a ton of pushing the ball down the field. And, you know, of course, we've heard from Washington fans plenty over the last year that it's a dink and dunk offense, all this sort of stuff. So, Stein overrated and benefactor of amazing talent. Man, I can't get there. I really can't. A coach that is being elevated by his talent would be Mario Cristobal and Marcus Arroyo with Justin Herbert circa 2019. Okay? Once he had a better offensive system and better coaching, he became a top 5 to 7 quarterback in the world. And he looked really good at Oregon. He didn't look like that. So that's an example of, boy, if you didn't have this guy at quarterback, what would you really look like? And the answer, of course, came in the form of Anthony Brown in 2021. And he even had a better OC in Joe Moorhead. So when you watch the Oregon offense, there are a lot of RPO tags to run plays. I do think that for the sake of the offensive line, being able to fully engage in a block and not worry about going down the field, it is good to have some more straight runs, and Oregon doesn't always do a ton of that. They did some. Anytime Oregon's under center, very seldomly are you going to have RPOs in those situations, and that was the first play of the game, and Oregon created an explosive. Doesn't mean I think they should do that all the time, but no, this one for me is a 1.5 on Spencer's scale of agreement. The only reason I stick the half in there is because it's not because I don't think the offense can take shots down or can't take shots down the field. Like they're just physically incapable. Will Stein won't let him or anything like that. There is something to, Tom Brady's critics for a long time would dub him Captain Checkdown, which was always an overblown moniker. But it's because when you watch a lot of Brady's best drives, I remember this unfortunately very vividly as a Seahawks fan, the drive where they took the lead before the Seahawks screwed up and threw it on the 1-yard line instead of giving it to Marshawn Lynch, which was a Jeopardy clue the other day. I'm never going to get away from that, ever in my entire life. It's brutal. It pops up at the randomest times. I remember watching that drive, and frankly, for a lot of that game, I remember watching it going, man, he's just throwing underneath the whole time. You know why? Because it's there. Because it is there. I don't think that there is something wrong with taking things that are there. If a defense is sitting back and too high all game and they won't bring a guy down in the box, but they're just going to run, a quarters coverage that's just meant to keep everything in front, why in the world would you throw into the middle of it? Which is why what I talked about in the first segment, I think is a really interesting thing to watch this week. Does Oklahoma State want to take that away? Do they want to say, we want to force you to throw it down the field? I don't think Will Stein, they've created explosives since he's been there. I can think of several off the top of my head to Troy Franklin. The explosive passing plays were a huge part of why they beat Ohio State a year ago at Autzen Stadium. I don't think it's that he doesn't know how to call them, he doesn't want to call them, or that he's telling Dante Moore to not take those shots when they're there. It's just that he does emphasize, number one, RPOs, which can be a healthy number of his passes. And by the way, if you scheme them correctly, those can turn to really easy first downs. And number two, he emphasizes to his quarterbacks correctly, hey, there's nothing wrong with taking 5 yards on first down. It doesn't have to be, if he gets into a second and short and you're on the other side of the 50, yeah, I do want to see you take a shot. Because you should feel like if we have 2 plays to get 2 or 3 yards, yeah, we should have the confidence to do that. This is Oregon. This is not some poverty program, as Mike Gundy has noted. So, back in the Mario days, 2nd and 2, 2nd and 3 was a running situation. Like, no, I'd be okay, especially against Oklahoma State this week. I would certainly be okay with, any kind of 2nd and 4 or less being, hey, let's see if we can take a shot here. And I do want to see more of that, but the eye test and it being overrated, it's different than some other offenses, sure. But I can't look at a guy that's put back-to-back quarterbacks in New York City as a Heisman finalist and say, this is an overrated offense. It's just the talent around him. Like, no, we don't know yet what Dante Moore is going to become as a quarterback. We do know through one game that he's at least capable. Now, against inferior competition, he looked capable at UCLA too. So we can't draw sweeping conclusions just yet, but the track record of doing it with different types of players, highlighting different skill positions, and getting them involved in different ways, I can't get into the Will Stein is overrated camp. I really can't. Even if, you want it to be, like, I guess you want it to be quicker. Like, you want the drives to not last as long. I don't know. I just want points to be scored. And when I look at the numbers and the production from a variety of positions, I can't argue with those results. So the downfield thing, yep, I'm going to watch for it this week and throughout the year because eventually you're going to have to do that. As we saw a season ago, you got to create those chunk plays at some point. But so for me on Spencer's scale of agreement, that's a 1.5. I didn't even get to wide receiver 1 because I was ranting about that for so long. I get why you have the thought. I'm just not there. I'm not there. Who's going to be wide receiver 1? Oregon's 2024 recruiting class. Still to come on today's show. First, this episode brought to you by DoorDash. It's almost the weekend. Time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order. These players delivered when it mattered most for the Ducks. I'm starting with Jordan Davison. 3 touchdowns in his first game as a Duck. The true freshman from Modern Day. Coaching staff say they like these guys a whole heck of a lot. And you know what? Kind of looks like they've got good reason to, because Davison looks like the Thunder and Dier Hill looks like the Lightning, just like we talked about in the offseason. Davison and Hill both looked really, really good. You know who else delivered? Malik Benson. First game as a Duck, I didn't have huge expectations for him. I said, you know what? Feels like anything he gives you is a bonus, and there are other guys that could pick up the slack if he's not able to get into a rhythm. But he was great, led Oregon in receptions and yards, pulled in a touchdown from Dante Moore as well, which was Dante's best throw of the day. Those guys delivered for the Ducks. And DoorDash delivers your Saturdays with DoorDash Streaks. You save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday, keep the streak alive, fuel your game day, only with DoorDash. Terms apply, promo period through November 18th. Go check out DoorDash today. So just as we all predicted from Oregon's first game, Noah Whittington's the leading rusher at the moment, followed by Dier Hill, and Malik Benson is the leading receiver. 5 catches for 51 yards. And Jay Harris is second. I mean, come on, who didn't see this coming? So this question came in from Benny. This is Austin's question. Who will end up being wide receiver 1? Didn't really see any wide receivers get prioritized. My everydayers out there, do you recall in the lead up to this season what my general thoughts were on the wide receiver room? Hey, Austin, if you're an everydayer, maybe you just kind of forgot. But I said for a while, I don't know who wide receiver 1's going to be. I predicted DeCorian Moore because I kind of wanted to just speak it into existence and it would be exciting. By the way, I still think that's entirely possible. Dude is engaged. You hear the phrase, no block, no rock. Not a problem with him. Got to get him blocking the right guy. But he's clearly going to be one of the guys. He's going to be one of the top receivers on this team. We did not see a ton of Justice Lowe. He had 1 catch for 12 yards in this game. But I think DeCorian has a real chance. I think all of these guys, frankly, have the opportunity to emerge as a number 1 receiver. And after watching DeCorian in one game, seeing how he looked in a college environment, granted it's Montana State, I'm sticking with DeCorian Moore at the end of the year. But the likelihood that there are no 1,000-yard receivers on this Oregon team by the end of the year, I think is totally feasible. And by the way, you can be a good team and have some good passing numbers and not have a 1,000-yard receiver. Let me pull something up real quick. And this is where my Locked On College Football knowledge comes in handy. So Oregon State's quarterback, who went through it because the Beavs stunk it up against Duke last week. Last year at why can I not see his stats from his time at Duke? Malik Murphy last year for the Blue Devils was a good quarterback. He had a good season. He turned the ball over too much, but he completed 60% of his passes. That's a little low. This was with Duke a year ago. He had 26 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. That's too many. But he had 2,900 yards. If Dante Moore this year goes for 2,900 yards, Murphy had 2,933 to be exact. If Moore goes for 2,900, 3,000 yards, 26 touchdowns, and let's say cuts those interceptions in half, which I think he would in this system, are you considering that a successful year? I am. I absolutely am. Side note, Duke last year did not have a 1,000-yard receiver. They had 2 really good ones that were in the, I think, 700 to 900-yard range. They did not have a 1,000-yard receiver. So I think this offense, with the way that it is schemed, the depth of talent that they have, has got all the possibility to look that way. And I think that's fine. I think that's totally, I'd rather have that than, 2018, where Oregon's got a 1,000-yard receiver in Dylan Mitchell because Herbert has no other options on third down. You can go to anybody on third down and I feel confident. So, yeah, I'll stick with DeCorian Moore, but, wide receiver 1, I don't know that there's a classic kind of wide receiver 1 that you think about as like, oh, he's the go-to guy. He's putting up all these stats. Like, through one game, it's just one game. It was Montana State. That take continues to, I think, look pretty good for me, that you could just see this get spread around a lot. And, working the Oregon basketball mantra. Sometimes you, sometimes me, always us. Benny sends this one in SSA. Oregon's 2024 recruiting class is already proving to be one of the most impactful freshman groups in Ducks history after just one game. Do you mean to say 2025? Because you said freshman. So let me know. But I didn't want to talk about both those classes. So Ifeoma Badegu was a redshirt freshman from that 2024 class. Also, notably a part of that class, Aaron Flowers, who got the start, Aiden Breland, and Elijah Rushing saw the field as well. We saw some of Kamar Mathuti. We saw Sione Laulea. We saw Kingston Lopa. There's a lot of guys. That is a lot of guys. But if you're talking, so for 2024, one of the more impactful freshman classes, I presume you meant to go 2025, DeCorian Moore, Naeem Offord, Brandon Finney. Boy, who knows if Trey McNutt would be playing right now if he were fully healthy. We saw Nasir Wyatt on the field. He didn't play a ton. De'Aaron Hill and Jordan Davison both being out there. Cooper Perry was getting praise from Dan Lanning in his press conference recently. Yeah, this 2025, like both classes, frankly, are making their presence felt on the field, and it's really exciting because you have a bunch of true and redshirt freshmen that look like they're able to play. Bigger test this week. We don't have definitive conclusions on anybody yet, but one of the more impactful freshman classes, through one game, gosh, DeCorian, Offord, and Finney were all big contributors last week. And then Davison and Hill, the second leading rusher, Davison 3 touchdowns. So if you did mean to say 2025 and not 2024, then I'll give that one an 8. 2024, I'll give that one probably about a 6. So just following up on the trivia questions from yesterday, no more until Tuesday trivia next week. Submit your questions through direct message. It is much easier for me to keep track and for you to get me the answers as well. Like, for example, I didn't see an answer, unless I missed it, from Charles about the Mel Renfro question. So we'll have to come back to that one. But Balin got back to me on this one about the loudest games at Autzen Stadium. Now, I've actually seen a couple of different answers on this. According to Balin's research, it is 127.2 decibels against USC in 2007, not USC in 2009. Which I also saw as one of the highest decibel games either. Ohio State last year was my guess, and that apparently is incorrect. I don't know. Like I'm curious to see where you guys are getting the specific answers from, because I saw a number of you chiming in the comments about, it was this. But per Balin, put his name out there. That's the way the game's played when you send in a mailbag question. USC 2007, that was a big one. That was, I want to say Harper, last name Harper. Harper or Sharper, maybe. One of those two last names had, I think, the game-sealing interception in that game. Game-sealing pick USC 2007. That was a big one. That was Matt Harper. Matt Harper, I think, had the interception in that game. That was a big game. That was a big. USC was near the peak of its power at that point in time. I did get the bonus question right, though. Got to give myself some props there, which was which Big Ten brethren took a trip here to Autzen some years ago and accused us of piping in crowd noise. Michigan State, 2014. How time flies. That was a non-conference game, now a conference game, of course. But anyway, so if you want to be in Tuesday Trivia next week, you got to submit the questions through the direct message, whether it's Instagram or Twitter, or become a Locked On Ducks insider. Any of those keeps it nice and easy for me, and I enjoy doing it. I'll keep following up on it. More on Oklahoma State and the matchup, keys, and everything you need to know for tomorrow's show. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time, and until then, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.